What's up, everybody? In this episode, we're going to talk all about how to create innovation and change in your business. Let's get into the podcast. Okay, people, welcome back to Rebranding Safety. In this episode, we are talking all about how to create innovation and change in your business. Today's guest is a Doctor of Sociology, a Developmental Coach, an integral Facilitator, a critical Theorist, a Usui Reiki Master. I really don't know if I said that right. Teaches meditation, coaches CEOs, but why is she on a health and safety podcast? Well, that's a great question. She created a framework or a construct or whatever we want to call it a while ago, and then over the last couple of months seems to be having a bit of a burst, and it ended up scrolling onto my feed on LinkedIn, and it really grabbed my attention. And this framework starts with, if you want innovation and change, then you need, and it just scrolls for all the things you need. And in today's podcast, the producer of said framework is going to take us through each step. I think innovation and change is something we as an industry of health and safety and business leaders as well, it's something they strive for, it's something they need, but it's something that maybe is really difficult to get. And we kind of see that in today's conversation. Now, today's conversation, we're going to split it over two parts because it's a very long conversation, but it's such a good conversation. And to be honest, I think we could have gone even more in depth of pretty much every subject that we touch on. It's also worth noting that we are talking about a framework that, it is worth noting that we are talking about a framework, so you might get lost if you're listening on the podcast whilst walking the dog or driving, etc. So if you do get lost, feel free to pause it, jump over here onto YouTube, and you'll be able to see the framework in the middle of the screen, on the right of the screen, or somewhere, wherever I find in post-edit, where the best place to put it. But you'll be able to follow what we're talking about. Hopefully that'll be a lot helpful. Hopefully that'll be about a lot more helpful. There we go. So let's get into today's podcast with our guest, Dr. Dara Blumenthal. So, hi Dara, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks,
All
James.
the way from New York, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm sitting at my in my apartment at my home in Brooklyn.
Cool.
Yeah.
I went to New York once. New York's where I proposed to my wife, actually, in central New York. But yeah, why don't you let us know who you are, what you do, what you're about, etc. Give us a little kind of like your story as an introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. The work that I do today is focused mostly on working with teams and individuals. So I work inside of organizations, and then I also work in sort of a private practice capacity, like a therapist would. And I work in primarily two expressions. One is as a holistic coach, and the other is as a facilitator. And I do a particular type of facilitation that's called integral facilitation. And all of the work that I do is super emergent. So it's really, really servicing the moment. So it's unstructured in a way, but more than it being unstructured, it's that it's actually emergent. So it's happening in real time rather than something being planned. So I've been doing this sort of work and increasingly sort of turning into the personal realm for the last 6 years since I left academia. So I'm trained as a sociologist. I have a doctorate in sociology. I have a master's in critical theory. I do lots of different things. So I can talk more about whatever's interesting.
So when you say like emergent, does that mean like it kind of like you let it evolve as it goes so that the conversation kind of leads you? Is that right? Or?
Yeah. Actually, I love that expression. The way that you put that, the conversation leads you. So I think at like the most simplest, the way to define facilitator is that you're there to help make something easier. So, you know, when I'm helping a team work through a difficult conversation, or something that happened that was challenging, or sort of just general dis-ease, the conversation is leading us, and I'm just sort of guiding us. I'm just sort of leading us along the way to make those moments easier.
Do you want to give us a quick intro, if there is such a quick intro, into critical theory? Because I did Google it when we had our call about a month ago, and I kind of got it, but my mind then kind of went. So, do you want to give me a quick intro to kind of what that is, or what that means to us laymen?
Yeah. Would you be willing to say a little bit about your understanding from what you Googled, or at least what just sort of remained in your awareness?
Not much, very little, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I remember reading it and being like, okay,
Yeah.
no, I'm not sure. I'm going to ask. It's
Okay.
probably my level of understanding.
Yeah. Cool. Well, so I did this master's in critical theory after my PhD, which is just a weird, like, I just do things in a weird way, my own sort of style. And the reason that I wanted to do this degree in critical theory after I got a PhD in sociology is because I wanted to enter back into something that was more interdisciplinary. So I wanted to sort of finish my sort of formal schooling. I mean, I've done a lot more sort of training and education since, but in terms of being in like a formal institutional environment, was something that was not so strong discipline. Sociology, strong discipline, you know.
Okay.
So critical theory, when I studied it at the graduate level, it's a discipline that interweaves philosophy, literature, sort of social sciences. So literally, I took classes in literature and in the School of Philosophy. So there's also like a strong psychology element. And where I did my undergrad at Gallatin at NYU, which is the School of Individualized Study, which is also a strong critical theory tradition. So basically, it's like, the way that I understand it is like you're using yourself, your subjectivity, as the way into not only theory, but really trying to make sense and trying to make meaning of the world, of the social, which is a little bit different than, so like in sociology, you're trying to be objective, I think. I mean, I'm making broad generalizations here, but there's a lot around the self and around like the social as like an experiential phenomenon that continues in critical theory as a way of sort of breaking things down, deconstructing things and reconstructing things to really make sense of the universe or of the society. I don't know if that helped.
Honestly,
yeah.
No. I remember as you were talking, I remember thinking that it said in the description, and it was literally just a little description box in Google. That was my level of research on it, I'm not going to lie. And I do remember it being something like the phrase kind of cross-pollination of loads of different subjects did kind of come into my head, and then you kind of touched on it there. That maybe that, I don't know whether I've completely gone off on a tangent, but is it kind of like trying to find the golden thread that connects all of them, psychology, sociology, science, biology, whatever, and just having that critical theory all through them? I don't know whether I just made that up or what.
I like it. I think it, well, so what I can tell you too, and if people are interested, you can read, I've published my master's dissertation on my Medium. I mean, it's missing footnotes and stuff, but generally the whole thing is there. And so what I did in that is I'm looking at, basically, I mean, this is sort of like so meta and ridiculous at this point, but looking at the way that critical theory as a discipline needs to sort of turn its lens onto itself in order to be ethical, to be responsible in the way that it's making judgments and making assertions, that you actually have to start with deconstructing yourself before deconstructing anything outside of yourself. I put outside in quotes there because I'm trying to sort of break down the inside and the outside.
Okay. I'm gonna read it actually because I love this stuff, but I am such a layman and I just whoa, okay. But I was really intrigued by it when you were talking, and before when we had our other call, and you were saying about critical theory, and I was like, I should probably try and find out what that was. It didn't work, obviously. So kind of what brought you to my attention was this kind of, I calling it a framework. You might not want to call it framework, I don't know, but essentially a very nice drawing of, and you start, if you want innovation and change, then you need blah, 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 blah. And yeah. I liked how it looked as well. It's quite simple. I like things simple, as we've just kind of found out. And that just really grabbed my attention, because I do think innovation and change in my professional and personal opinion is something that we in the health and safety industry really struggle with, because I think innovation in itself and change in itself in a way both inherently involve risks, and we as an industry maybe historically have been trained to be very risk averse. So we don't like innovation, because to be innovative means try it somewhere way new, and that might not work. And then in health and safety, that means maybe someone gets hurt. I don't know. And the same with change. Change, I find, is something that businesses really struggle to deal with. So that kind of just really grabbed my attention. So before we kind of dive into that, essentially we're just going to kind of run through that. But maybe you could take us to the point that brought you to that. Do you know what I mean? Like what made you go, I get this, I'm going to write this down. Like, why did you write it? Why did you do it?
Yeah. So I created this a few years ago, and for whatever reason, it's having a moment right now.
Viral.
It's gone viral. Wow. Yeah. So a few years ago, I had been working in the organizational design and organizational development context. I was sort of a few years into this field, and a couple things. I was frustrated with how simple and maybe simple is not the word. It's like how uncomplex things were. People oriented to how humans organize and interact and get things done. It would just seem so simple to me, coming from a really rigorous academic background where I taught cultural studies, and we moved through all of the nuances of how humans are and do things together. The way that it sort of was at work, working inside of these environments, mostly for me, Fortune 500 companies at the time, it just was so simplistic and so reductionistic. It was so like, well, if we just like push this button and move this lever and jam this thing into this thing, like all the humans are going to do what we want them to do, which just isn't how it works. And then this was right around, I created this, I think kind of in a response to this New York Times, I think it was a New York Times article that came out all about Google, and how Google discovered psychological safety as the key, and I think this is probably an article that's still going around, but it was such a hot thing.
Is that the one where they were trying to create the perfect team or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think I've read that as well.
Yeah, and I'm like, great. And one, at least from the point of view of sociology, we've known this for a really long time, at least 100 years.
Oh, wow.
And I just had a conversation the other day with some folks at Culture Amp, and they were saying, this whole idea of soft skills was first published in 1918. So like we've known about this stuff for a long time. So it didn't feel so new to me, and it felt like, just it still didn't go deep enough for me. So like I'm sort of like a depth. There's like this like Jungian Carl Jung, the psychologist who was a student of Freud's. He has like depth psychology. It's like you go in deep. I'm like a depth coach, or like a depth facilitator, like a depth practitioner. So like I'm like, where is the depth? So I created this framework, or whatever you want to call it, in response to where is the depth. Because if we don't start to orient to our human experience from a deeper place, we're always going to be at this like really surface level, which I think for a lot of people, it's like we're running around with like chickens with our heads cut off. It's like there is no there. So that I think that's just sort of the basic context, and maybe I'll pause there. There's one or two other things I could say contextually, but I'll just see if there's anything. I've been talking for a few minutes, so.
Well, you're supposed to talk more than me on this, so you're doing okay.
Okay.
That what you kind of said there about just kind of skimming the surface resonated with me a little bit. I think within my industry especially, that's something we're really good at, is just skimming the surface and not really diving into stuff. So maybe this is kind of like a two-pronged question, but I suppose, why is it that we do that? So the kind of example I think about is like a long time ago, we had this amazing thing called behavioral-based safety. It was a phenomenon that was new to us, think about how people think and should try to influence their behaviors, etc. And it was like Professor Scott Geller was probably one of the biggest, most influential person who is, I think, is an American, if I remember rightly. And he got kind of started about psychology in safety. And we had this BBS system, and everyone it was a new fad, and everyone just kind of jumped on it, and it was amazing. But again, I think on that, we only skimmed the surface, because a lot of businesses were looking at it being like, essentially it became a stick system. We were like, showing videos saying this is the behavior you should never do, you shouldn't do this, and we never really got down to the depth of it. And most of the stuff I'm getting or talking about here was this really good interview with him, another safety podcast did, from Sunny Gopal, and he mentioned in there that we never touched on the point that the environment that we're in defines our behaviors, and that essentially has become one of my favorite sayings. But why is it that we just skim the surface? Is it we're lazy and it's too complicated, or is it too specialist or something like that? Like, why do we just skim the surface? Because psychological safety, which I'm sure we'll delve into later, is all the rage now, and I think it's all stemmed from that same report about Google that you said. Everyone's talking about it, but it's like, are we really talking about it, or are we just talking about the headlines, like you were saying?
Yeah. So the thing I've been thinking a little bit about something called polyvagal theory this week, but I think the most important thing about this, for this conversation, is that one of the most important elements in anything that's happening in terms of interpersonal dynamics and even intrapersonal dynamics, understanding our own experiences, are physiological states. So not only states in terms of states of consciousness, but actual physiological states. So what's happening with our nervous system? And it's like a really simple elucidation is that if someone gets triggered, and then that person is triggered, and you're trying to give them instruction, or you're trying to ask them to do something, it's really likely that they're not going to be able to take that information in. Just physiologically, it's not possible. So I think these sort of things are happening all the time in the workplace environment, And so the other thing I want to say about this is that there's a way that as a whole society, we have collective trauma, and that's, you know, in our bodies, in our nervous systems, in our neurological systems, our neurophysiology, the way that our brains function, you know, it's there, and we're also highly disembodied as a society in the contemporary West. So we're disconnected from those experiences. So we're not privy to them. It's like we don't have the self-awareness to know that's actually what's happening in our direct experience. So we just stay at the surface level all the time, because really that's over generations now, that's what's been safe. That's safe. Because as we dip our toes into these more uncomfortable spaces, these more uncomfortable places in our experiences, we're not skilled, we're not equipped to navigate them, and to navigate them in a way in which we stay in relationship with each other. And I mean, sort of to jump to the punchline, this is what I believe we really need. We need to be able to co-regulate. We need to be able to stay in relationship as we go into these deeper places. And for lots of reasons, we're just sort of waking up to that fact.
Wow, that was amazing. It kind of reminded me when you were talking there about like what's safe, and then I was listening to something today about how we, as maybe especially the West, but primarily humans, we need something to blame. And I was kind of thinking, you probably know, it was on the world news, but we had a very big fire in London of a block of flats called Grenfell, and in the industry we seem to have jumped on one thing, and that's the cladding around the building, and that's it. And it's now don't get me wrong, there are people in the industry that are going into the depth of this stuff, but when you really start to dive into all the stuff, all the kind of individual, I kind of call them dominoes that led to the big fire, it's huge. It's absolutely massive. You're talking like cross industries. You're talking about dealing with problems in construction, in housing, in maintenance, in FM, absolutely everywhere. So maybe it is a point, like what I really liked what you said about it. It's safe. You know, it's safe for us to watch the news, blame the cladding, and boom, move on. And that kind of reminded me of something else which I read in one of Andrew Sharman's books, where I can't remember the person he was referencing, but he said about we as people have like heuristics in our head, and there were 3 types, but I can't remember what they were. But essentially I read them as that they're like anchors, you know, like so Grenfell becomes an anchor in our brain, and you know, 9/11 and what happened in England as well, they become anchors in our brain, and we'll kind of never forget them to a point. But then we attach that to this surface level root cause of cladding or a religion or terrorists or whatever, and we never get past that. Is that kind of the same thing?
Yeah, I think so.
Good. I'm glad I understood that then.
yeah. And you know, to build on that a little bit, you know, as we've entered the last couple decades, we've entered this sort of new paradigm of you know, like a lot of the consultant speak is like speed and complexity, right? Everything's faster, everything's more complex. We are in this always on culture, it's global, right? Speed and complexity. So as we've entered this new paradigm, it's like we have even less time, we have even less opportunity to actually be people together, to be human, and to connect. And so these sort of heuristics, these anchors, I think become even more laden with meaning for people, or they become like even bigger nodes in the network in how to make sense of things. So, and I think at the same time, the other thing that's happening is that people are seeking deeper and deeper sources of meaning making. That actually people are starting to get tired with the surface level, and it's actually starting to break down more. That we actually need a deeper ability to make sense of things, which is maybe a different conversation, but it's sort of how the pool of sort of wisdom, the wisdom traditions are coming back online in the West for the first time in a really long time.
Wisdom traditions, as in, what does that mean?
Yeah, like the resurgence of or maybe not a resurgence, but the surgence of like meditation and mindfulness
I thought
and
that's what you meant. Yeah.
yoga, shamanism, using psychedelics for awakening the mind. So all of these things are coming back in, even like folklore and storytelling. So all of these different ways of just making sense of things that maybe isn't so linear, isn't so surface, isn't so simple.
Yeah, I thought that was where you're going with that, because I watched, I don't know if this is probably, when talking it from my level to yours, you'll probably laugh at me, but like, I'm fascinated with the Explained series on Netflix. I don't know if you, and they've got a Mind Explained bit now. So they're talking about, they were talking about psychedelics in there and how maybe we just scratched the surface and actually how amazing these things could be for our minds and stuff like that, which I was a bit intimidated by, but we'll leave that where it is. And then they're talking about mindfulness. There was a whole episode on mindfulness, and I wouldn't say I'm a practitioner in any way, shape or form, but I'm definitely massively intrigued by it from two things. One, that it can help me on a personal level, but two, how it can help me in a professional level. I think to be more mindful at work of our environment, risks, hazards, whatever, instead of historically where we've kind of approached safety from a habitual point of view, for it to be habit, which to me kind of means that we switch off. So we switch off because it's a habit, whereas mindfulness means we wake up and we start looking at what we're actually doing and thinking about the impact. So I'm very intrigued by it at that point. And then to watch this episode, when it came on there, I was like, oh, I'm going to watch that. So I put it on, and then long story short, it was like, what you know to be mindfulness is actually not mindfulness. This is, and they started talking about like Buddhism and stuff like that. This is actually mindfulness. And I was like, I've literally just wasted a year like trying to work out what this stuff is, and it's wrong, or not wrong, but it's not traditional kind of wisdom like you would say. But
yeah, and maybe I should just say that as sort of like full disclosure, like I practice Tibetan Buddhism and I teach meditation. So I have a
bias towards it, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. Like I have a really deep firsthand experience that has shifted my life in many ways, and so I've real belief in these skills, these mental skills that we can develop, and the way that we can train states. So I mean, I could go off on, it's not a tangent, but I could loop something in right now if you'd like me to. Okay.
Yeah. I am really conflicted at the moment because I'm like, oh, I want to talk about this framework, but I actually really want to talk about this kind of meditation, mindfulness thing, because I'm like, oh, which way do I go? So you go off on your loop, and then we'll bring it back.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe I can do some integration. So, actually, one of the things that I was reflecting on as I was sort of preparing for our chat today on this model, this framework that I made, because I made it a few years ago, and I'm trying to be like, at it sort of at a deeper level, like, why did I create this? And one of the things that I think is really powerful, and that I think maybe wasn't really, and I said this a little bit, right? Like, I think in the organizational context, we focus so much on the external, and we don't focus a lot on the internal. So the external, it's like behaviors, things you can see, systems and processes, the way we do things, right? But we don't really focus a lot on the internal. So the inner world, the inner experience, and even the sort of inside experience of the we space, the culture. So I'm sort of preemptively already elucidating the thing I'm going to introduce now, which is basically the integral framework, the integral theory from Ken Wilber. He's the originator, and integral is like it's basically like a meta theory. It's a way of trying to comprehensively make sense of sort of anything at any given time, and at a very, very basic level, integral theory functions on, so I'll just pause and say, I feel like I've spent like the last however long, I don't know how long we've been talking, like 20 or 30 minutes, talking about how things are so simple. So I want to introduce a way that we can start to make our understandings more complex, more diverse, and more dynamic, not for complexity for complexity's sake, but really to try to understand at a deeper level what might be operating. So that's what I'm doing here. So integral, right? At the most simple level, integral is it's referred to in the community, the integral community, as AQUAL. So it's all quadrants, all levels, all lines, all types, and all states. So, and basically, the idea is that in order to really have a comprehensive view on anything, you need to include at least these 5 elements. And obviously, each, I could explain each one, in a surface level, but at sort of the most primary thing, all quadrants, are these 4 things. It's like an X and a Y axis, right? So it's an individual, it's a collective. It's like there's an individual version of this, and there's the plural or the collective version of this, and then there's the inside of it, and there's the outside of it. Okay. Right? Yeah. So what maps onto that really nicely is I, we, it, it's. Okay. So in terms of perspective. So most of the time at work, we're in the it and we're in the its. Okay. It's abstract. It's like, this is the behavior, this is the system, these are the numbers, this is the quantity, this is our timeline, this is the plan, right? And we don't actually spend a lot, that's all exterior. We don't actually spend a lot of time on the internal, on the interior. We're starting to now, right? Psychological safety, all this talk and work around culture. We're starting to get into the interior space, which I think is vital. And it's one of the, in my opinion, and I think something I've always been interested in, probably for the last 15 or 20 years, are states of consciousness and states of experience. And the reason that mindfulness at sort of the very basic foundational level of any meditative practice is mindfulness, is being able to just simply observe without judgment, without any analyzing what's occurring, right? So mindfulness is neutral. You're not trying to change anything. You're not trying to do anything. You're not trying to understand. You're not trying to, you're not even trying to understand. You're just trying to simply observe. So it's neutral. And so in terms of training states, mindfulness and meditation it's like as good as it gets. These are thousands of years old technologies that they work, they really work. So if you focus on your breath for a few minutes, or you look at a painting, or you look at the ocean, whatever it is, you actually can change your physiological state. And so I think that's just like fundamental to operating in such a complex world that we're in. And if you take something like innovation and change, which is so vital right now, maybe more so than it's ever been, because things are so complex and there's competition coming from everywhere, disruption, all of that. If you want innovation and change isn't an external thing. You have to start from the interior. You have to start from the inside. So, I'll pause there. That's my, that was my tangent, which maybe isn't a tangent.
No, it was really good, actually. It was really good. I like that, that piece you're saying about just observing without a kind of judgment. That's something that I personally struggle. I can't just look at something. It's always well, why is that there? How's it working? I wonder what, if I was just in the gym this morning or around lunchtime, just sitting there watching this gentleman on a cross trainer, like, I wonder why he's got that tattoo, I wonder what he's doing. My mind just constantly going all the time. It's kind of, so that would, for me, is like something I think that would benefit me, just to be able to just switch off, because I'm tired.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I liked your loop back. You did it quite well to loop back into innovation and change, which is where we are. So well done. So it starts with, if you want innovation and change, then you need teamwork and collaboration, which requires communication. Now, those three are probably, I would say, the only three words on there that I feel like I truly understand. When we start talking about psychological safety and interpersonal trust, I'm starting to think, well, I'm not sure I understand those. So let's start with those three. Is that just, to me, that's just obvious. We need teamwork, we need collaboration. Something we struggle with still, even now, collaborating. Maybe we actually had, we haven't published it yet, but we've got another podcast about construction, and the lady on there was saying that one of the biggest things the construction industry struggle with is, because it's so competitive, they're not learning from each other. So one will have a really serious injury or an incident, and they'll publish their results, their lessons learned within their business, but not to another construction industry, to a business. So they're not collaborating with each other. And then I see it time and time again in businesses of, like, finance not talking to blah blah, and blah blah not talking, and nobody talking to health and safety, because we've got this perception. But so then that kind of brings us all back into communication. So maybe we start there, and if it is as simple and we've just now, then we'll move on. But maybe what are those three from kind of your perspective? Why did they need to go on there?
Yeah. So, and I don't know if you'll publish the visual for people with the podcast.
Yes. This video.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah, I don't mind. But I mean, I don't know if people will be able to see. Will you make it easy so people can see the diagram?
Yeah, I'll try. Let's see how I can do that. That's a great idea. Let me see what I can do.
Yeah, cool.
Challenge accepted.
And I'll just say a little bit about it for people who are listening without seeing it, which it's basically, it's like a flow chart, right? So it builds, it's like it's a super linear, and it's like, it's sort of algorithmic, right? It's like, if you want this, then you need this, and if you that. Okay. So the top, right? This is so the top of this chart, which is like if you're trying to achieve innovation and change, then you need teamwork and collaboration. And in order to have teamwork and collaboration, you need communication. I think, from my experience, most of the work that I do inside of organizations is just helping people communicate. So, like, someone I was talking with the other day, they were like, people don't actually spend time in meetings to make sure that everyone walks away with the same understanding, right? So we have a meeting, we leave, and there's 5 different versions of what happened in the meeting. There's 5 different versions of what the outcome was. There's 5 different versions of what next steps were, right? It's like you're operating, because the communication, in many ways is simple, is surface level. There's probably a lot of jargon. There's so much jargon in corporate that people are not ever on the same page. And it's because they don't take time to actually communicate, to actually relate and say, hey, can I just check my understanding? Or this is what I heard you say. Is that right? So it's literally, it's so simple. But, I remember a few years ago, I did a whole communication training around active listening in a big multinational corporation. And one of the models that we were using to teach active listening and communication was this very simple, it comes from like nonviolent communication, NVC, but literally you say, like, you know, when you said XYZ, you know, I felt Y or whatever. Like you literally say, let me just check that this is what you just said. Let me check my listening. And they were like, we know people don't really talk like this. Like it was like, they were so uncomfortable by the fact that this felt unfamiliar and sort of phony to them, which sure, anything at first feels unfamiliar and phony, but to actually say, you know, hey, let me just check that I heard you. Is this what you said? Did I miss anything? Is this what you meant? Am I understanding you? Like that sort of dialogue doesn't actually happen that much, I think, on teams.
Which I suppose actually really quite nicely flows into why it doesn't happen, is because your next bit, which communication, which requires psychological safety and interpersonal trust, which to me makes sense as you were kind of describing it. And I was thinking, well, why wouldn't I go in a meeting? Hang on a minute, can I just make sure I understand this right? Because I would fear somebody going, what, you don't understand this? What, are you stupid? And that kind of environment. Right. So I suppose that flows really nicely into your next bit.
Right, exactly. So because so often, and this again, this is from Stephen Pogas. I'm screwing up his last name, but the originator of Polyvagal theory, who I watched a talk with him last week, and he said, you know, all of the time, from the point of view of our physiology, our nervous system, we're in like a defense mode. We're defending ourselves. And the way that we've sort of dealt with that as a society is that our focus becomes on accumulating resources, whether that's material, whether that's financial, money, whether that's people, whether that's favors, you know, politics. We're trying to acquire more and more resources to try to calm down our need to defend ourselves all the time. Unfortunately, it actually doesn't work. The only way that we can actually get into like a real safe place is our ability to co-regulate, to sit together and to be in uncomfortable situations and to stay in a relationship so that our nervous systems all calm down. We all achieve safety together. So when it comes to that next step of psychological safety and interpersonal trust, if you don't have that sort of really sort of basic trust that you're not going to be met with some kind of reactivity, whether that's like you just said, you know, what are you, stupid, you don't understand it, or any other form of reactivity of someone shutting you down or someone else getting shut down or someone getting angry or upset or just whatever the emotional reaction might be. And it could be anything. It could look, reactivity sort of isn't specific. Reactivity can look in all sorts of different ways. So if you don't have the basic trust that like you're not going to be met with reactivity and then the whole thing is going to get shut down. It's one thing if someone meets you with reactivity and then sort of owns it and say, oh, actually, like, sorry, I'm being reactive. Like, let's actually look at that. Like, if the interaction is simple in such that it's like, you say something, someone reacts to you, you get shut down. Oh, you're never going to say anything again. Like, if you don't move beyond that sort of 3-part move, you're never going to have the trust. You're never going to have the safety to really fundamentally connect, have good communication, and do really interesting stuff in the world, let alone like solve all the really big, wicked, complex problems we have right now.
Yeah. Is that like, well, as you were kind of talking, I was trying to think, like, is the onus of to get to that point, and maybe we'll touch on it, but like, and you've wrote on the framework, which hopefully when we publish it, people will be able to see, but you've wrote, this is where the conversation usually stops. And I wonder, and I could be completely wrong, but is that because it's maybe 50% for the person, say if I was communicating something, a PowerPoint presentation, whatever, in the meeting, and trying to say, this is where we are, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it's partly how I'm communicating and how I'm reacting as the presentee, no, the presenter, sorry, and then the presentees, how they're reacting as well, like acknowledging. And I think you've got self-awareness. Yeah, you've got self-awareness on here, but quite far down the flow chart.
Yeah.
Is it both of those?
Totally. And so this is, like you said at the beginning of our conversation, like we always want to blame. We always want to place blame, right? And that is part of that sort of defensive physiological nature, right, that we're in all the time, is, oh, let's just blame someone, or I'll take all the blame. You know, it could go either way. And so we actually have to enter into a much more complex understanding of the social, of the cultural, which is beyond right or wrong, black or white, you or me. Like, we actually have to see how the moment is co-created. It's emergent, it's emerging, right, in real time with whatever is occurring. So I think you're exactly right. And also to tie in something you said from the beginning, that quote you liked around environment. So the environment also plays a role, and whether that's the amount of time that you have, or if you're about to get kicked out of a conference room and you can't actually have the conversation that needs to be had, these are really real factors on whether or not someone is going to speak up. So yeah, it's all of these things. It's the people in the conversation, it's the space, it's the time, it's, is someone virtual, or, is everyone else in the room? Like, are you co-present? So yeah, it's like I was trying to say before with the integral model, it's like, can we take into consideration, these 5 different aspects of what's going on right now to actually try to build the safety, or to generate the enough comfort, so that we can start to co-regulate each other. And calm the nervous system down.
Okay, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that. That was the end of part 1. We're going to stop it there. And don't forget to join in next week, where we're going to carry on talking about the rest of the framework, and you can find out how you kind of tie this in a loop and finish off how to create innovation and change in your business, because that's what we're trying to do here, isn't it? So don't forget to, if you like this podcast, click like, because that would be really nice, and it would make me feel really happy today, if you could do that. If you haven't subscribed already, then please hit subscribe. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss another episode. And if you're also not on YouTube, don't forget to go and check YouTube out, because we provide other content over there as well, bite-sized kind of videos on anything from a career in health and safety to how to manage manual handling. We're trying to cover everything in as simple as possible. If you listen on a podcast, then please give us a rate and review, whatever platform you're on, if you're able to do it. We would really appreciate that, and it just helps us get out there to other people, so we can help more and more business leaders and business owners out there. So it would be grand. Talking of getting in other people's ears, I would love if you could share this podcast. We know it is the best health and safety podcast out there, and I'm just going to say it, we are friggin' awesome. So please just give us a share. If you do rate, review, or share it, be sure to tag us, or copy and paste it, or screenshot it, or whatever, and let us know. Say, hey James, I did what you said, and we'll give you a shout out. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you next week for part 2. Safe.